I'm John Law, this is Chasing Cars, and today we're driving a Kia Rio GT-Line. Now it's a competitor for the likes of the Toyota Yaris, the Mazda 2 and the Volkswagen Polo, but it's also now got to compete with its slightly bigger cousin, the Kia Stonic, which shares much of this car's underpinnings. So in today's video, we're going to check this car out and see how it drives, how practical it is, and whether it's worth considering in your next car buying purchase. So without further ado, let's jump into that. So today we have on test this GT line variant of the Kia Rio. It's the range-topping variant and it's the only one available with the 1 litre 3-cylinder engine. And it retails for $25,990 here in Australia on the road, which is a pretty good deal. And it's also $4,000 less than the Kia Stonic, with which this car shares many of its underpinnings. So in theory, this car should get less kit, but as we'll find out in a second, the Rio is actually just as well specified as that light SUV counterpart. And like the range-topping GT line Stonic, this Rio gets a couple of identifiable features on the outside. It gets a little bit of a body kit, a little bit more piano black detailing, and a blacked out tiger nose grille, which is actually not a grille in any Rio because it's just covered by a sheet of plastic, which I think is a touch weird. But you can let me know what you think of that in the comments section down below, and of course, what you think of the Rio more generally, and we'd also love it if you could hit subscribe. And now we're going to jump inside the Rio. So inside the Kia Rio GT line, and it's a pretty familiar place because it's exactly the same as the Kia Stonic. Now, this car came first, the Stonic came second, so that's more of a reflection on the Stonic than this car. But as a light car, it is actually quite a nice place to be. Things feel more quality than you might have expected, but of course there are the usual detractors, including quite a lot of hard, scratchy plastics up here on the door. The armrest is at least soft touch, and you do have a auto up and down driver's window, but the rest of the windows you have to hold to go up and down. That's one of the things that we'd really like to see Korean manufacturers just include all auto up and down windows. As for the dashboard, it's also scratchy plastic, and you have this sort of faux carbon fiber fascia here, which I think looks a little bit cheap and a little bit sort of overly sporty for this car. But the Rio GT line does kick back in a couple of really important areas, and one of those is the steering wheel. This is a lovely item, and Kia's been really good at making steering wheels lately. It's got a nice circular center, it looks quite attractive, and it's also wrapped in a nice semi-perforated leather, and it feels good to hold in the hands. There's also a slightly flattened bottom and some contrast stitching to add that sort of feeling of a little bit of expense. You've also got a nicely leather-wrapped gear shifter here, which kind of looks almost like a Genesis product. The manual handbrake, God save the manual handbrake, of course, but it is wrapped in sort of scratchy plastic. But you do have a nicely padded armrest here, which is something that Toyota Yaris does not get. Under that, you have a good bit of storage, 2 cup holders next to the handbrake, and a really nicely thought out 2-level tray for your phone and odds and ends, including stuff like sunglasses cases. You've also got one 12-volt socket and one USB port, which isn't perhaps enough if you're going to use this for lots of people in the car at any one time, but the standard inclusion of wireless Apple CarPlay means you only really need the USB cable to charge, not actually to connect your phone. And the wireless Apple CarPlay in this Kia seems to work better than previous iterations of it. I have had only one dropout during my usage of the Rio GT line versus more dropouts in other cars. So clearly that system is improving, and it's all run through this rather crisp looking 8-inch touchscreen. And Kia's own infotainment system is also pretty nice to use. You've got, pretty straightforward stuff going on. This car doesn't have navigation, but at least all of the Rios get this 8-inch touchscreen with Apple CarPlay wireless as standard, which is really nice to see. Now ahead of me, as for technology, I've also got 2 analog dials with a digital 4.2-inch TFT readout. Now in this class, that's pretty much par for the course, if right at the top of it, although the new Volkswagen Polo is probably going to move to a fully digital dashboard, which will make this car feel a little bit old. And then back to comfort for a second, we've got these fairly nice seats. They are sort of vinyl accented with cloth centers. They stay nice and cool in the Australian sun too, which is a bit of a bonus and something we like about cloth here. They are manually adjustable as well, so you can't get the perfect driving position, and they are a little bit flat, but again, it is a light car and it's a pretty basic piece of kit, but at least this little Rio GT line is quite a cheerful place to be. So let's jump into the backseat and see how practical the Rio is. Now, you might have spotted the marketing campaign for this car's SUV cousin, the Stonic, where there's a lot of young people doing backflips and then 4 of them jumping inside the rear seat and the front seat of the Stonic, exemplifying how much space it offers. But the good thing about the Rio is that it's very similar to that car, and that means it's fairly comfortable back here for such a small vehicle, for such a compact car that's just over 4,000 millimeters in length, in fact 4,065 millimeters. It's actually pretty spacious for me at 6'2". I've got agreeable amount of headroom. You wouldn't want to be much taller than me to be sitting in the back, but you know, not many people are that much taller than 6'2", so that's pretty good. Behind my own fairly set back driving position, my knees are barely brushing the seat, but the seat is nice and soft, although it is vinyl, not real leather, but it's got a nice soft seat back, and toe room is really agreeable. So I'm actually quite comfortable in here. The visibility out is pretty good too, although I would like to be set slightly higher than the driving seat if that was possible, and the lack of a height adjustment on the passenger seat in the front will mean that this side passenger will have a worse view out than the front seat passenger. But anyway, the windows go all the way down, which is a big plus as well. Couple of detractors though. Obviously the scratchy plastics continue, and you do have slight padding here on the armrest for the outboard seats, which is nice, and a couple of little bottle holders, which is good because you've got no center armrest with cup holders or anything like that. And the middle seat, although a bit of a perch, would work for children in a pinch or shorter people as well. On both outboard seats you get ISOFIX ports and a central top tether point, so not too bad for carrying kids then. The other big problem is that the Rio GT line doesn't have any air vents for the back seat, but there's not many cars in this class that actually offer that because they really are designed for 2 people at the front with extra people in the back at a pinch. But it does kick back with a fast charging USB-A port, bringing this car's total to 2 USB ports. So not too bad. Let's jump to the back of the Rio GT line and see how big the boot is. So we come around to the boot of the Rio GT line, which you can tell from a couple of features. Just like the front, you get a little bit of slightly more aggressive body kit action and some piano black bits, as well as dual real tailpipes, which is a really nice touch from Kia there. And this GT line badge just here below the LED taillights. So I reckon it looks pretty good. Now under this boot, of course, it's not electrically operated. We're dealing with a car that's $25,990 here, so you wouldn't expect that. But pop that boot and you do have a pretty reasonable amount of storage space for a light car. It's quite a long vehicle in its rear overhang, the Rio, so you do actually have good space for the chasing car's suitcases. We've got one big boy in here and then we've got the smaller one. Couldn't fit the medium-sized one as well, but it's not too bad, and you could, in theory, do an airport run, but you probably wouldn't want to take it on a family holiday with 4 people. Now, as for practicalities, there are some sort of attempts at shopping bag hooks back here, and then under the boot floor, Kia don't put a full-size spare tire, but there is a temporary space-saver spare to get you out of trouble. So let's close that boot of the Rio GT line, which isn't too hard to do, and take this little hatchback out for a drive on the road. All right, let's talk about how this Rio GT line is to drive. Now first I'm going to talk about that GT line badge because it does adorn pretty much every product here sold by Kia in Australia, and most of the cars that it sits on the back of, including the Cerato GT line, which I know is popular with a lot of you guys in the comments section, have quite a loyal following. They're sort of slightly warmed through hatches, not a competitor for the likes of, in this case, the Polo GTI or the Fiesta ST, but somewhere along the lines of getting there. So there's a couple of changes to this car over the regular car, but it does share pretty much the same spring and damper setup. But the big thing about this GT line in the Rio range is that it gets a really nice engine. So a 1-litre 3-cylinder turbocharged unit. It feels quite European, so power output is 74 kilowatts and then torque is 172 newton meters. Now that is some way off a Volkswagen Group 85 TSI engine, which produces 200 newton meters, and it does feel that way on the road. This engine just feels less muscular than that car's engine, and it doesn't have that mid-range punch. Most of its power is found sort of above 2.5 and below 5, and that's where this engine feels pretty good. It sounds kind of interesting as well. It's got this sort of, almost sounds a little bit like a Subaru Flat 6 from back in the day, but a little bit broken as you rev it out. It's not going to be to everyone's tastes, but I kind of don't mind it. It doesn't sound as tractory as a 3-cylinder can do sometimes, so yeah, it's pretty decent in my books. But it's a lot better than the 1.4 litre naturally aspirated engine that comes equipped on this car's sort of understudies, so the Sport and the S. Now, that engine is just feeling pretty old and gutless. So it's got the same power, 74 kilowatts, but torque is down at 133 newton meters. So really, if you can afford to go for the GT line, I would definitely recommend doing so, because this engine feels a much better match for this Rio in slightly sporty guise, and that's pretty cool. Now, the gearbox is a 7-speed dual clutch unit produced by Kia and Hyundai, and it's okay, it's not amazing. It doesn't do the fastest shifts as you get close to redline, but most of the time it's not too bad. They've engineered a decent amount of creep into it as well, so it doesn't take too much adjusting if you're coming from an automatic gearbox. Personally, I would have really liked to have seen Kia offer the option of a manual on this top grade, but unfortunately in Australia, this car is automatic only, so there's no choice there, only on the lower grades with the naturally aspirated engine. Now let's talk a little bit about refinement as well, because I know it's a light car, but sometimes you do have to road trip in a car like this, and the Rio is pretty good. It's not dead quiet, but even on coarse chip roads, it's not uncomfortable and it's never terribly loud, so it's pretty good in that sort of manner. And then let's talk about the running costs, but I'll jump outside the car so we can have a proper chat about insurance and fuel usage. Now, let's talk about running costs. Over the last 12 months, the median budget direct customer paid $776 to comprehensively insure a new Kia Rio. Of course, everybody's situation is different, and the premium will vary according to make and model and other things insurers take into account, such as your postcode, driving history, who drives the car, and where you garage the car. Now, as for fuel consumption, we return 6.4 litres per 100 kilometres out of this 1 litre 3-cylinder engine, which is pretty good, but it is some way off Kia's 5.3 litres per 100 kilometres claim. And of course, that's quite a long way off what you can get in a Yaris hybrid. But of course, that car is quite a lot more expensive. Now, the other thing to take into consideration is warranty, which is something that Kia is streets ahead of most of the other manufacturers on, offering a 7-year unlimited kilometre warranty. So if that's something that matters to you, let me know in the comment section down below, and definitely consider something like this Kia Rio GT line. Now, back to driving the Rio. All right, back to speaking about how this Rio GT line is to drive, and we get to talk about its dynamics and its chassis settings. And Kia has done a really good job. Now, it seems in Australia, Kia really favours a slightly firmer tune than sister company Hyundai, and that is pretty accurate in this case. So the Rio is actually quite firm, and it sits quite nice and flat on the road and has a really good level of grip for its power. Doesn't feel like there's too much tyre grip. These Continental Conti Sport 5 tyres are actually a really excellent choice, and it's great to see a company like Kia fitting quality tyres to their vehicles. Plenty of grip in the wet and great amount of grip and feel in the dry, and it really complements this car's chassis. That slightly warm hatch feeling, it's not a hot hatch, it doesn't have the same pointiness of a Fiesta ST, but it's a really fun car to drive down the road, and I think it would suit a lot of people's sort of level of driver engagement quite well. And I think that's where Kia has a really good brand identity at the moment with their GT line models especially. So this and the Cerato and the Picanto GT line are perhaps not the most incredible vehicles to drive, but they are a really solid and safe companion. Now, of course, the trade-off with this slightly firmer ride, certainly in the Rio, is that it is a little bit harsh around town. So speed humps and expansion joints around town do tend to crash through into the cabin a little bit. But that said, it's not supposed to be a limousine. It's definitely a hatch with a slightly sporty character. So for me, it's not a big deal, but it's definitely something you're going to want to test drive because there are plusher options in this segment. So we can't talk about the engine and gearbox in this car without talking about the drive modes offered. So this is where the Rio is a bit odd, certainly the GT line, in that it offers 3 drive modes, which is normal, but it defaults to eco mode every time you start the car, which for me is pretty frustrating because the throttle response in eco is really dull. That isn't such a big deal because you just reach down and hit that drive mode button and then you're in normal, but then the steering in normal mode is weirdly heavy and claggy underhand, which is a bit odd. And so when I was driving this car, I was worried that the sport mode was going to be unusable, but in a strange twist of fate, sport mode actually lightens up the steering response, and it also seems to sharpen it in the Rio GT line. So on balance, sport mode is the best to drive in, I think, for steering feel, and it also keeps the gearbox tuning really nice and on top of things, and it does a pretty good job of keeping you in the right gear for where the power band is. The only thing that is a bit of a frustration is this automatic gearbox, the selector has a manual mode, but you don't have any paddles behind the steering wheel to take easy control of it yourself. So that bothers me, but it might not bother you. And now let's have a little chat about safety, because that unfortunately is where the Rio is starting to show its age in this segment. So for a start, you've got a key to start the actual car. There's no push button start. I know that's not a safety thing, but it does make it feel a little bit old. It does have AEB and lane trace assist, but in Australia, we don't actually get adaptive cruise control on any grade of Kia Rio, which is a bit of a weird thing, especially given that the grille has the spot for where the radar would sit in other markets. So you can let me know what you can think of that down in the comment section below. But anyway, this Rio GT line does at least get some safety features, including AEB with pedestrian detection, and it also gets a lane trace and lane keep assist. Nothing like blind spot monitoring or anything like that, but it is a fairly well-equipped car in that sense of things, and it's also got ESP and traction control and all the usual stuff you expect, as well as plenty of airbags, enough to give it a 5-star safety score back in 2017. So the Rio is a pretty good little car, affordable thing to run, and the biggest part about it is that it drives much better than that taller Stonic SUV counterpart, at least in my opinion, because the ride quality of the Rio isn't that much more compromised for comfort than the Stonic, and yet it has a much more consistent and better feeling to its road holding capabilities. So that's my opinion on the Rio GT line's driving experience. So what do we think of the Kia Rio? Well, it's actually a really cute little fun and remarkably practical car. But you have to make sure you opt for that 1-litre 3-cylinder engine that is only equipped on this range-topping GT line. It has a lot more punch than the 1.4, and if you must go for the 1.4, then you kind of have to go for the Sport, which makes sure you get all of the adaptive safety features you need for your family and friends to be safe in the car. But you can let me know in the comment section down below whether you like the Kia Rio GT line or whether you think that there are other options out there from Volkswagen that might do it better. But for me, I actually really like the way the GT line drives, and I think it's a much better value proposition than this car's cousin, the Kia Stonic. Again, let me know in the comments section, and while you're down there, we'd love it if you could hit subscribe and that bell icon. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.